Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're joined today by two guests from GE, Linda Boff, the Chief Marketing Officer, and Rusty Irving, Chief Engineer. We're going to talk about the industrial internet, basically the incorporation of digital into all the big machines that run our world, and the evolution of marketing, which is in the midst of a seismic shift right now. So let's start with the industrial internet. What is the industrial internet, and why should normal people care about it?
So I'm going to give you the normal people care about it, and then Rusty is going to go a little bit deeper, if you will. So maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, Henry, we sort of said, look, you know, GE has been about making things. We have this deep, deep heritage in manufacturing, but the future is going to be about making and connecting machines. Big iron meets big data, if you will. And we kind of helped coin this term, industrial internet, the internet of really big things. And this is the future of the company. I mean, this is a major pivot for us. We've got, as I think you and I have talked about before, a big group of people in San Ramon, you know, maybe 1,000 people in San Ramon. We opened maybe 3 weeks ago a sort of mini version of San Ramon, a foundry in Paris. We'll have one in Boston in our new headquarters. We're hiring software engineers and computer scientists because we, you know, for us, the industrial internet, as you'll hear this from Rusty, is all about driving outcomes for our customers. So, you know, Rusty, I'll turn to you to sort of help dimensionalize this a little bit.
Right. And, you know, consumers are very familiar with the internet. We watched through the 90s up through today how you went from, you know, very static pages to get information about products to being able to purchase products to today having products recommended to you. We're all interconnected. We have many channels to interact with each other, all digital. So now all of a sudden the industrial internet is we replace kind of the people as the subject matter with things, or our industrial machines. Except that you need a much more heavyweight type of internet to be able to do this because the data is much more enormous, much greater in size, and much more complex to understand. So with the advent of cloud computing is really one of the trends that enabled us to take advantage of it and build something that's heavyweight enough for us to build an internet for our assets and make them work better for customers.
So let's talk about specifics. So you make the engines that power the Dreamliner, the new Boeing plane that everybody loves. They're all industrial internetized. They're filled with sensors. What does that do? How does that help?
Sure. So, you know, even at the most basic level, we take 3 parameters from each of those engines, and we can take many more. But just with the basic parameters of exhaust gas, temperature, fuel flow, and core speed, we're able to just take measurements throughout the flight, look at them, trend them, and understand the health of each and every engine, just like you go to the doctor and they take your temperature or blood pressure, and they're a great indicator of how you're doing. We trend that, we learn about the engines, we segment them, and then that allows us to advise our customers how to get more out of them, how to fly them in ways in which they'll last longer, and be able to predict how much life they have so we can schedule when they need to come off wing for maintenance, which saves them a lot of money.
And do you get advance warning of problems?
Yes.
They're one of the locomotives,
Right.
obviously.
This is like where the heavy weight nature of what we're doing really matters. Taking in massive amounts of information and looking at maybe the 1 or 2 anomalies you're seeing, you can start to postulate, is that a trend we should be concerned about? You know, one of the things that's actually happened to our planet in the last 10 to 15 years is something called the Dust Belt. We have this particulate matter in the atmosphere in certain parts of Earth. The engines that fly through that don't last quite as long as the ones that don't fly through it. So we're able to spot those trends much earlier and be able to treat the engines before any real problems erupt.
One of the concepts, Henry, that we talk about is the advantage of having no unplanned downtime. And if you're operating in industry, unplanned downtime is a bad thing. That's kind of your enemy, right? So a lot of what we're trying to drive with the industrial internet, you know, we talk about GE as a digital industrial company, is to help our customers manage their downtime, their assets, and the amount of time that they're operational in a much more efficient way.
And so is this something that folks who fly, just about all of us, can look forward to?
Yes.
Fewer delays, fewer surprises, fewer notification from the cockpit. Oh, we've just discovered that the engine's broken and we need the team to come fix it.
Right. We've all probably been on a plane at least once if you fly a lot, and all of a sudden, just about the time you think you're leaving the gate, the pilot comes on and tells you they got a light on or something. You know, this is going to reduce the number of times that happens tremendously. And you know how it affects consumers, right? You know, it'll lower their fuel consumption, for instance, right? So it should be able to offer more competitive pricing on tickets. things like that.
And Linda, you mentioned that to build out this business and incorporate it in everything that GE does, you actually opened a huge new division in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
You had an advertisement that went along with it that everybody liked, where the engineer announces to his friends that he works for GE, and it's from,
Yes.
why would you ever do that? And, well, it's actually exciting, and I work on trains and
Yeah.
things. How important is that piece of it? I mean, are we now going to expect airlines to know how to interpret all this data, or are you doing that for them?
Well, I would say, and Rusty will jump in here, I think for GE, we're 124 years old. We're a 124-year-old startup, if you will, and people know us well. They think of us a certain way. I think as we have added this whole layer of analytics, predictive analytics, data, having the public, if you will, from a brand point of view, think of us as a company that is this hybrid of digital and industrial is important. Talent is a big piece of that. So the fun campaign you referred to, this idea of a developer sort of telling his perplexed friends that he now works for GE, while it's light and it's marketing, there's a truth to it, which is we are now bringing hundreds, now thousands of people to work for GE in a completely new capacity, and that leads to a new type of behavior. I mean, Rusty, you might talk a little bit about what you do is in the digital twin, because that's a piece of this.
Sure, and to the point too about starting up a brand new division of GE Digital based in San Ramon. Yes, we had to go somewhere and really dip into that ecosystem and find the digital talent. What makes us so powerful in this is that we've married it with our legacy industrial know-how, the deep physics knowledge that we have about these machines. And when you put these things together, it's a very powerful thing. So we're calling it one of our killer apps, built on top of the industrial internet, is something we call the digital twin. So for every one of these aircraft engines or locomotives that we make, we'll also have its digital twin. Think of it as the medical record of that asset. So we track it as it goes through its life cycle from when it was built and commissioned to how it operates. And again, using the data that we get off of that and the physics models that we have developed about that, we can have very unique insights nobody else is able to calculate, again, to tell how to get more out of the asset, and again, reduce that downtime.
And how unusual is what you're doing relative to everybody else? Because from the outside, listening to lots of big manufacturing companies, everyone's talking about digital, it's the next thing, cloud, is what you're doing, where is it in the competitive?
So, there are very few companies, in fact, I think we're singular in this way, that have the domain expertise, right? We know industry. We have been in industry for over a century. We're taking that knowledge of industry and adding the data component. And frankly, Henry, we're trying it on ourselves. I mean, the first several years of industrial internet has been GE applying the technology that Rusty and I are talking about to our own factories and our own machines. It's kind of rare in this world that somebody with our type of expertise can add that layer, sort of practice it on ourselves before we introduce it to customers. So, we think of it as sort of our industrial superpowers meeting data and analytics.
Yeah. I really look at it as we've been doing lots of this for over 30 years. We have started to build what we call monitoring and diagnostic centers decades ago, where we do watch these assets with the data we were able to collect then. Now we have more sensors, more data, more know-how about what to do with it. Again, the capacity, though, that you get from cloud computing allows us to do this at a completely different scale. So we think what really makes us much more unique than anybody else doing that is the fact that we've built a whole platform for it called Predix, right? This is GE's industrial internet platform. Sometimes we call it, the operating system for industry. So when you build industrial apps, we want people to build them on Predix. We're doing it for ourselves, and we're offering it to the world.
In fact, Microsoft, I think this morning, is making an announcement they'll be using Predix. So, we are seeing an uptick in adoption. To have an operating system of industry is a great way to say it, that is super strong. We sort of say industrial strength, that can hold literally petabytes of data, that has, cybersecurity as sort of a number one feature. We take so seriously. I mean, you talked about jet engines before. This is data that has to be ironclad secure. So we think we've sort of have the right to do it. We have the knowledge, and we've been practicing it ourselves.
And you've talked about this being a 10-year plan to build out Change GE and go forward. We're in year 3 or 4. Where are we in 10 years? What does it look like? Not just for GE, but for the machines themselves.
Yeah. I mean, what's that future look like? It's an interesting landscape to sort of portray a little bit.
That's right. Well, I think, we move from where we are today. We have already built 35,000 twins of our assets, and I imagine, in that, the time span remaining to full realization, there'll be millions and millions of people with digital twins built with our technology to track their assets. And there'll be a whole, continuum of, we'll build some of them for them. We'll offer our digital twin and Predix capability as a platform, as a service. So depending on your level of sophistication as a developer, you can do it yourself, or you can have us do it all for you. And there's many options of how it's hosted. But I think just like we saw on the web, right? We never imagined the number of cell phones, right? I think this will go way beyond our wildest dreams. Because in the first 4 or so years of doing this, we've hit every metric we set out for ourselves. And when we started, they might have looked a little crazy to us, but we're doing it, and I'm confident we'll get all the way to the end point.
And have you been able to do things for customers that you didn't foresee in the beginning? Because if you look at the iPhone, for example, when this was first introduced, everyone made all these crazy predictions, and it turned out they weren't anywhere near crazy enough. And all these things have been created that nobody imagined then.
Well, I think if I can jump in on this one, I think what's really interesting is just in some ways like iOS and like the Apple phone, Predix is a platform, and we expect, maybe 10, 20,000 developers this year to be building apps on Predix. So, we've got 4,000 or 5,000 already, and I think that's where the flywheel starts to happen, right? A great platform, developers, industrial developers looking at this and saying, wow, I can apply what I know and create industrial solutions. So I think that's going to start to, make a big difference as the apps come online. I mean, there are predictions that the industrial internet will be bigger than the consumer internet. Hard to believe.
In terms of data.
But in
not
terms
hard
of
to
data,
believe.
in terms of the size of the market, and frankly, in terms of the impact.
Can we talk about marketing?
Let's talk
We
about
do have
marketing.
The chief marketing officer.
Let's
of one of
give
the
it a go.
world's most innovative marketing companies. So stepping back,
Yeah.
this 10-year period, 5
Yeah.
years ago to 5 years in the future,
Yeah.
can you give us a sense of what's happening to GE's marketing and ad budget?
Yeah, so look, I think we try, Henry, and you and I have had this conversation at various points, to market in the year we live in. We don't sort of pine for the good old days when there were 3 networks and it was easy to reach people. What we try to do in marketing is to get the best possible content message out where people are spending their time. And as a result, do people still watch television? You bet they do. However, in our opinion, where we might place advertising is a lot different than it used to be because of binge watching, because of DVR. So we've shifted most of our television ad spend to be during live programming. Sunday Night Football is a good example of that. And our digital spend is just increasing percentage-wise. And when you have something like Facebook, and I'm not going to make this a Facebook commercial, but Facebook is the most efficient place to reach people. It's as much a performance channel as it is a social channel. Google's really efficient. And then us, we love to experiment. We've experimented as a company and as a business all the way back to Edison. So we continue that spirit of experimenting when it comes to our marketing, and that might be doing a podcast, which we did last fall that was terrific, called The Message, or VR, or just being on an emerging platform. So as I think about marketing and trends, those are a couple that come to mind.
And Facebook's made no secret of its desire to capture a huge percentage of television dollars.
Here we are talking
exactly.
on Facebook
Yes.
Live, funnily enough.
Very, very convenient. What's the unit when you buy, when you replace television advertising with Facebook? What's the unit?
So that's a great question. I think of the unit as attention. Right? So we all want attention. And I think when there were 4 networks, you got attention simply by being on Friends or Cheers or something like that. As we all strive for attention, I think, is more and more in people's feeds. think about the amount of time that we're on our phones and think about where we are on our phones. You know, research shows fewer and fewer apps are being used. The apps that are used are frequently ones, Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, where you're putting videos, hopefully people are watching us right now on Facebook Live in stream. But I think despite all the metrics available to, you know, Insider to GE, the most important one is, are people actually engaging with us? That's the unit I want to buy.
And what are you producing to do that? And to be very specific, there's been a lot written about basically ad fatigue. People have, especially the younger generations, don't want to like ads. So one thing that's happening is this co-creation of content. You have been at the forefront of that. You actually created a TV series, I think, with National Geographic.
We did.
So what does the ad unit look like of the future? Is it going to be a 30-second spot? Is it going to be a pre-roll, which a lot of people don't like?
Yes.
Is it going to be something in which you are featured that is a story created by a producer? How do you get people's attention?
I kind of think any and all of the above are possible, but it comes back to, is the quality high enough? You know, I talk often, again, you and I have talked about this in the past, you know, you don't want to create content that is second fiddle. You want to create something that is a really good story. That can be 6 hours, which is what we did with National Geo. It can be 6 seconds, which we've done on Vine. It can be Instagram. It can be a podcast. And I tend to think the unit, and I now hear where you're going on this, can be integrated. So when we did this podcast last fall, we were very loosely part of the story, very loosely. But what we surrounded it with was this idea of the GE Podcast Theater. And it's funny, it kind of harkens back to the 50s, where there was, once upon a time, the GE Theater, and there were soap operas brought to you by consumer packaged goods companies. So sometimes it's creating a franchise, and in some ways what we did with podcasting, this one podcast, what we did with Nat Geo, was kind of a franchise position. But make no mistake, there are times when we will create something that looks and smells and behaves like an ad. And if it's really good, and I'll use what we talked about a few minutes ago, because you brought it up, so I don't feel so sheepish bringing it up. The series we did on this young developer, Owen, was a great story. It was self-deprecating, it was funny, and recruiting went up 800%. So, you know, if you can find that bit of magic, and it is a bit of magic, right? You know, that can be very powerful. So I guess my long answer to your smart question is that the unit will vary, but it will not be one single, it's pre-roll, it's not pre-roll. I think it's going to come in a lot of forms and formats.
So going back as the last question to the first one, over the next 5 years, how do you see your spending shifting? Does it go to Facebook? TV to Facebook? Is that the simple way to think about it?
Well, I think that's almost too simple, if you will. More is going to Facebook, but our spend will go where people are spending their time and attention. Look, if every single person in America was watching ABC, we'd be on ABC. But every single person isn't. 1.5 billion people are on Facebook, and I think for any marketer that ignores where people are spending their time, they're doing it at their own peril. So our spend will shift as people's behavior shifts, and digital's only going up. So that's a really good harbinger for where our spend will go.
Linda, Rusty, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
Great to have
Henry.
you. We'll see you again.
It's great. It was a lot of fun. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.